Welcome to the Dynasty Dummies podcast. I am Zach Reed. If you're joining live, you notice that I'm by myself. If you're in podcast form, J Mike is not here. He is a bit under the weather, and I am starting to come down with something myself. I'm pretty sure it was Disturbed who said once, "Get up, come on, get down with the sickness," and so we're giving that a shot. But this is probably going to be a little bit of a shorter show tonight because J Mike is not here, because I'm not feeling particularly great. But I got four wide receivers that I wanted to talk about because we had members of our audience ask for these players to be watched, and here we are delivering. So we're going to get you all the way up to wide receivers 28. We're going to go through Ryan Flournoy. We're going to go through Hayden Hatten. We're going to go through Jha'Quan Jackson, and we're going to go through Tahj Washington tonight. But before I do that, this is going to be the catch a couple show, not the catch all show. But before I do that, I wanted to talk just a little bit more about theory and specifically behavioral economics as it pertains to fantasy football, because that's kind of my jam. And we get into a lot of game theory, we get into a lot of econ, but I think the failure of game theory within the fantasy football context is most of game theory and most of economics deals with people being rational. And so that's not necessarily the way people are. So the theory of economics, when you're looking at a gamble, which is fantasy football, you are looking at two states of wealth. You're evaluating the wealth if you win, and you're evaluating the wealth if you lose. But that's not really how people attack gambling. What really happens, and this is back to Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist, brilliant man. He and his partner that he did all his research with came up with prospect theory. And prospect theory says that that's not true. Prospect theory says that instead of, when people look at gambling, they're not looking at the two states of wealth, the wealth if you win or wealth if you lose. What prospect theory says is people think about gains and losses, and that's a distinct difference. The mind is created to make sense of things, and so when you lose, it hurts. And so there's a tendency to shy away from that sort of thing. Again, where if you're looking at the state of wealth if you win and the state of wealth if you lose, you didn't change wealth. But in your mind and in the human mind, you feel as if you lost something when you didn't win the gamble. And the other part of prospect theory, which I think pertains especially to this time of year with rookie evaluations and rookie drafts, is the human mind was designed to make sense of things and make connections and tie things to past. And so when we look at prospects, and especially when we tie prospects back to other players, we start doing comps and we start saying, oh, this player looks like that player. We're making sense of the past because the past doesn't have any surprises anymore, because we're in the future now looking back at everything that happened, not remembering and not realizing and not having the perspective of the things that snuck up on us. And so we start to think that we can predict what is going to happen by looking at the past, and the past can give us a little bit of direction, but there are still going to be surprises. There are still going to be players that look like they should hit, and there are going to be circumstances beyond our scope of being able to predict that we're going to miss on and miss badly on. And there will be first round rookies that consensus loved that do not succeed at the next level. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking prospects, when you're listening to other people talk prospects, when you go into your rookie draft, when you understand that if you miss on a rookie, you did not lose. Your status quo stays the same. Your wealth, if you lose, stays stagnant. You didn't gain anything. And so it's important to kind of take all of that into perspective. At least the way I think about the game is, you're not going to be rational, so try to combat that by preparing yourself to think as rationally as you possibly can. And with that, I'm going to talk about some players that we are absolutely going to miss on. This is kind of the bottom of the barrel. I think Mike may have taken tonight off specifically to avoid talking about some of these lower tier wide receivers. I mean, this is a really, really deep wide receiver class. I don't remember the last class that I actually had to look at 28 or 30 wide receivers in order to get a feel for how well-rounded and how deep a class is. But this class I did. This class, the top is a very high peak. There is a very good middle class of receivers that I think will be fantasy productive. There are a bunch of other players who it's really hard to pick and choose between, but somebody within that group is going to hit and produce and be something that, 4 or 5 analysts say, well, I saw the whole time and you should have known, and everyone else is going to point to their models or their film work and say there's no way that anybody could possibly have known. It's just kind of a crapshoot the way it is. But I'm going to start off. We're going to talk Hayden Hatten. We're going to head to Idaho. We're going to talk Jha'Quan Jackson, the Green Wave at Tulane. I'm going to talk Ryan Flournoy for Herms out of southeastern Missouri. We get a little directional there. And then I'm actually kind of excited to talk Tahj Washington from USC. So I'm going to save him for last. I'm that guy. I'm going to take that perfect bite of cake right at the edge that has all of that frosting. I'm going to set it aside and eat that last. So I'm going to start with Hayden Hatten. I'm going to start in Idaho. He is a 5-year player at Idaho. Had a redshirt year in 2019. In 2020, had 43 catches for 613 yards. Really came into his own, though, in 2022 and 2023 with 83 catches and 93 catches, irrespectively. In 2022, his 16 touchdowns led FBS, the entirety of FBS for scores. And so Hayden Hatten is an interesting small school prospect that, again, we've had interest in having him discussed. And so 6'2", 205 pounds, wide receiver. In an alternate timeline, I think Hayden Hatten is the angsty protagonist of a J.D. Salinger novel about the difficulties of navigating the phonies surrounding the NFL draft process and the virtual impossibility of an upstart wide receiver from an FBS school to snag high draft capital. But in this timeline, Hayden Hatten put up back-to-back 1,200-yard seasons for the Idaho Vandals, finishing as the school's all-time leader in receiving touchdowns with 33. Hatton's work on the sideline is an absolute thing of beauty. He does a great job timing up back shoulder throws, and he's a ballerina toe-tapping the boundary. There are hardly any drops at all on Hatton's film, which is pretty rare, especially for a lower level prospect. He is a great, great hands catcher, catches the ball away from his body. And if the ball comes anywhere near his catch radius, Hatten is hauling it in. In the red zone, he was used as one of the primary weapons, and they would put him out one-on-one on an island, and he would win with savvy route running by setting up the defender and arriving exactly where he needed to be to make the play. Now, there are some drawbacks with Hayden Hatten, even with the gaudy stat lines that Hatten put up during the last 2 seasons. The best description of his game is the opposite of Russell Wilson. It is limited. And he is slow off the line of scrimmage. I think he can lose a route versus solid cover corners within the first few yards, which is not great. Hatton's straight line speed is several notches below elite, and he struggles to separate over the top of defenses. When he needs to utilize sharpness of cuts and dynamism to win, so at the catch point or at the stem of routes, Hatten often rounds his cuts and fails to separate. And if you're rounding cuts, you're ending up closer to the defender. You're not creating that quick separation, not creating that throwing window. I think it's unlikely that Hayden Hatten gets draft capital, and even more far-fetched that he parlays his sideline acumen and ability to beat zone coverages into anything more that moves the needle for fantasy football. While the receiver in the rye sounds like a decent read, it seems like the fate for its hero is to fall just short of true success. It would be fantastic if he did succeed, though. I like it when somebody gets excited about something. It's nice. So that's your Hayden Hatten profile. Small school. You're looking at grainy, gritty film and trying to pick apart full games, but we'll go that extra mile for you. We appreciate the audience participation that happens with this show. The more I do rookie work and the more I've done this show and the more that I've gone on other shows and the more I do the Dynasty Grind with Peter Howard, the more impressed and the more fun I have with the interactions from the people who listen, the people who enjoy what we're doing, and the people who enjoy fantasy football in general. It's just a lot of fun. It's not something that I anticipated happening back at the very beginning when I started doing this, but this community is fantastic and has just been a beautiful perk of this whole thing. All right, we're moving on. We're moving to Tulane. We're talking Jha'Quan Jackson, 5'9", 185 pounds. He really, counting stat-wise, didn't pop. I mean, his high for receptions in the season was 2022. He had 33 catches, 554 yards that season, also his career high. He did have 8 touchdowns back as a sophomore in 2020, but he also played with Geno Hess, and so he's a good running back, and so the offense didn't look quite the same in terms of passing volume. So again, Tulane, I think Jha'Quan Jackson hit the combine like a teal tsunami, running the 40 in 4.42 seconds. He hit 32 inches on his vertical jump and 9 foot 10 inches on the broad jump. Between those impressive numbers in Indianapolis and the buzz coming out of Mobile, Alabama after Jackson lit up individual drills during the Senior Bowl week, he certainly has improved his standing within scouting circles. I think some players, they write poetry when they get into open spaces. They avoid tackles and they take great lines to add extra yards to a play. Jha'Quan Jackson is one of those poets. He is very quick to transition from the catch point to a runner. And if he gets the ball with open field around him, Jackson uses his speed and his vision to create chunk plays. While it's not necessarily one for one as an addition to fantasy, Jackson's also a talented return man. And I think that could earn him a spot on an NFL roster while he refines his craft as a receiver. Now, at 5'9", 185 pounds, there are going to be physical limitations to Jackson's game, especially when he plays to the boundaries. He struggled repeatedly with separation versus man coverage, and especially once a defensive player is able to initiate contact with him, he's able to be rerouted, and they also can kind of stick with him, and his quickness is negated a little bit. And as dynamic as Jackson is with the ball, I don't think his route running is very precise. He often rounds routes or misreads cushion by half a step. And that sloppiness tends to make him a later option in the progression of most plays. And now I don't think you saw that when you're doing one-on-one drills down at the Senior Bowl, because he's the only option for throw, and eventually he will work himself open. But because he is a little bit less polished as a route runner and tends to round things, a defender can stay with him and kind of push him down the progression. Because of these deficiencies as a route runner, I think it can be difficult to get Jackson into space where he can make the most of his abilities, especially with the revision to the NFL kickoff configuration. Jha'Quan Jackson probably finds a roster spot with his dynamism in the return game. He rolled up over 700 yards as a kick returner and another 660 bringing back punts in his career at Tulane. So there is a place for him. I think Jackson can be a lightning strike on any given play, but for me, it looks like the odds of him hitting consistently for fantasy feel about the same as the odds of being struck by lightning. All right, we're gonna get out the GPS and see if we can figure out how to find Ryan Flournoy at Southeastern Missouri. We got some directional school goodness here, and Flournoy is a veteran, even though he's a rookie. Flournoy started his college career in 2018. He's been to 3 schools, but his final stop at Southeastern Missouri netted a 2022 season of 61 catches for over 980 yards, 7 touchdowns, and a 2023 of 57 receptions, 839 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Flournoy's 6'2", 205 pounds, and another player who popped off at the Senior Bowl, had some combine goodness where he ran mid 4.4s. And so people are starting to come to the Ryan Flournoy bandwagon. So again, like I said, we're plugging in the GPS. We're recalculating a little bit. Trying to navigate directional schools leading up to the NFL draft is a little bit like printing out your cross-country road trip from MapQuest. There are wrong turns, there are smudges, maybe a little bit of coffee stain, and an overall lack of clarity. Ryan Flournoy's route to the next level is even a little bit more circuitous than most. He began his career in 2018 at Central Missouri. After a redshirt year, a season stolen by injury, and a disappointing 2020, Flournoy transferred to Iowa Western Community College for a season before finally landing at Southeast Missouri State. Would you like to avoid toll roads? Ryan Flournoy is 6'2", 205 pounds, and physicality is definitely not an issue. In fact, he will find himself in matchups where he can exploit that and win with strength and repeatedly beat defenders. Flournoy is a shark, and when there is blood in the water, he attacks relentlessly. When Flournoy gets off coverage that affords him a free release, he is more than fast enough to take the top off a defense. He is an excellent deep ball tracker as well, and he's able to make adjustments to stack up defenders and put himself in position to make plays, even on poorly thrown balls or through contact. So his ability to get deep, his ability to use that mid 4.4 speed is really evident in what he does on film. But just because you are a big fish in the Ohio Valley Conference doesn't mean that that will translate to the next level. Relying on his size at 6'2", 205 pounds is going to be far more difficult in the NFL. And the amount of contact that Flournoy initiates will probably be a detriment to his game. He does not win with nuance in his routes. He often flattens out at the stem and runs too close to defenders. And with his propensity to initiate contact, getting too close to the defenders gets him hung up with defenders, gets him, putting himself into that defender. And so I think at the next level, that's really going to be an issue. And Flournoy has very good speed, but that lateral quickness and sudden movement skills in route are really lacking. It limits his ability to separate in the short and intermediate areas. An interesting note, though, on Flournoy's profile is that even though he's not a seasoned route runner, he is one of the few players that I've scouted who will use double moves near the goal line. Flournoy is fast and physical, but it feels like he will need to see a lot of growth in a short period of time to make it as a contributor on the next level at the NFL, and even more so to be useful for fantasy. Next stop, though, Detroit, and we'll see how he fares in the NFL draft. There are always guys who surprise me, but Flournoy feels like probably a backup wide receiver, maybe a special teams guy. I would like to see him be a special teams guy and get that ability to be on the field, but also see some growth. So we are all the way here. Like I said, this is going to be a flying trip because it's just me. We don't have the dulcet tones of J. Mike, but we're going to move over to USC, to Tahj Washington. I tweeted out the other night that Tahj Washington is not the best player in the 2024 draft, but he is one of my favorite players to watch, and he brings it on every single play, which immediately brought a retweet from his mother, who is searching his name and retweeting positive tweets. So be careful what you say about players. And I try to do this. We're not getting personal with these evaluations and these players. We want all of these young men to succeed at the next level. This is the fruition, the culmination of their dream of years of hard work, of collegiate seasons, and we want all of these players to succeed, even when we don't see the path that could get them there. There is one. These guys are all talented. They're in the NFL draft. And look, I really enjoy Tahj Washington. I think he is a very talented player, a little bit undersized, 5'10", 174 pounds. He started off at Memphis, played 2 years at Memphis. His second year, he caught 43 balls for 743 yards and 6 touchdowns, then transferred to USC, where he played second fiddle to Drake London, and then second fiddle in 2022 to Jordan Addison, even though he had 61 catches for or 50 catches for 785 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then in 2023, he led that USC Trojan offense with 59 catches, 1,062 yards, and 8 touchdowns. So, again, not necessarily the type of player that everybody falls in love with, but I really enjoyed his film, Überraschungsparty. That is the German word for surprise party. The Germans have a word for everything. And that was what this was. Every year there's a player who sneaks up on me, a player who is under the radar within the community, but immediately pops when you put on his film, a player whose tape just becomes a joy, a party to watch instead of a grind. And this year, that player was USC's Tahj Washington. Not that it matters a sniff for fantasy points, but Tahj Washington is one of the best downfield and effort blockers that I've seen in a long time. On multiple occasions, he ran down his ball carrier from 30 yards back to be able to throw a block that sprang them for another 5 or 10 yards. He also will block out of the backfield and kind of wham block like you would see an H-back tight end do. So super versatile as a blocker, super willing as a blocker, which is nice. That gains you respect and maybe playing time from your coaches. Also gains you a lot of points with the other players that you're playing with. While Washington is primarily a slot receiver, he has very quick feet at the line of scrimmage and can manipulate defenders before he's even ready to accelerate. So he'll give it that little headsy step and then go, and the defender is still trying to reconcile what just happened with Tahj Washington's feet. He's very dangerous with the ball in his hand as well. I love his little yards after the catch that he tacks on. You know, they can hit him on a screen, they can hit him on a slant, and he's going to add those 5, 10, 15 yards. There were a couple of plays where he sprang big runs after catch. When attacking man coverage, Washington uses lateral quickness and vertical sink at the stem of his routes to create separation. And I think that's important because the lateral quickness gets you side to side. So it's that plant at a defender's foot and then cut back to the other side, but also being able to get vertical and make plays where you're sinking your hip and you're on comebacks and hitches and that sort of thing, where you're making plays back toward the quarterback. He excels at both of those. And even though he's slightly undersized at 5'10 and 174 pounds, Washington is exceptional on the sideline. He does a really good job on back shoulder throws, and he does a good job working to get 2 feet down, even though that's not a requirement in college. So you can tell that he is already preparing to make that jump to the NFL by the way he plays on the boundaries. Now, downfield, there are some glaring limitations. Because Washington does not have elite speed, he's not going to be able to win over the top. Like, that's just not part of his game, especially versus man coverage. So, like, maybe he can manipulate a zone, a safety who pulls up, or a corner to get over the top of zone. But man coverage, where they're just sticking on his hip in his pocket, he's not creating separation deep. And this lack of verticality will most likely limit Washington to a strict slot role where he's going to need to rely on volume and to create his own yards after catch. Further narrowing Washington's path to success is the fact that, especially early on in his career, he was taken out in red zone situations in lieu of an extra tight end or a jump ball receiver. Now, further on in his career at USC, you didn't see that nearly as much. And they also would leave him in as a player in the backfield to make some of those blocks because he is so willing and so intelligent about making those plays. Look, I love the way Tahj Washington plays. I have a type. I like him slotty, and he is it. But I also recognize that it's a long shot that his skill set is similarly valued by the NFL. Washington is going to need day 2 capital, so to be drafted in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft in order to maintain our interest. But if that happens, if he goes on day 2, if he goes in the second round or the third round, I think Tahj Washington is fierce enough and talented enough to take a later round dart throw in your rookie drafts. And if he's not taken in the first 3 rounds, I blame my innerer Schweinhund. So there you go. That wraps up the final 4 wide receivers that we're going to talk about with the Dynasty Dummies, rookie Hootenanny. I know last week at the end of the show, I told you we were going to talk running backs this week. I decided to pivot because J Mike is under the weather and because I had some people that were really interested in hearing about a couple of these wide receivers. And so we've given you 28 wide receivers. We've given you 12 running backs. I think there may be 4 or 5 or 6 more next week. We've given you 4 tight ends. There may be a couple of more of those next week. And we've given you 4 quarterbacks. You are probably going to have to deal without hearing Michael Penix or Bo Nix just because I don't think there's much of a chance that they get first-round capital. And if they do, it feels like a bit of a reach. I've seen enough Penix and seen enough Nix watching the players around them to be a little tepid on their NFL prospects. I think there are 3 really, really solid, 2 really solid quarterbacks, 1 really nice project, and 1 his 95th percentile outcome is Kirk Cousins. But it's a great draft class. If you're in a dynasty league, which if you're listening to this, you're probably a dynasty player. This is a great draft class to be in. There's a high-end set of quarterbacks. There's a high-end set of wide receivers, and then a really big plateau, a mesa of middle class where there are going to be some good receivers come out of there. There is a really nice top end of the tight end position. Not only Bowers, but behind Bowers, there is Ben Sinnott and Jatavian Sanders. And, I mean, there's a really nice group of players, even behind Brock Bowers, who is an uber elite level prospect. That's not saying that he will hit at that Travis Kelce level, but it's saying that if everything you're looking at, the only thing that you could possibly want from Bowers is another 2 inches in height. So really good class. If I'm going to take this group back to front to back, and rate them, I think that my 1 is easily Tahj Washington. My 2 is going to be Hayden Hatten. My 3 is Ryan Flournoy. My 4 is Jha'Quan Jackson. And these guys are all really draft capital dependent, perhaps a little bit landing spot dependent, depending on whether or not they can hook on as a special teams player. But that is, man, that's all the wide receivers. 28 wide receivers that we've gone through in this 2024 class. I have almost 17,000 words on rookies that I've written up. And if you're interested in those, if you followed the show, if you enjoyed the show, or if you haven't followed the show and don't give a hoot, but have rookie drafts coming up, this is a great point in time to donate to Fantasy Cares. It's always a great time to donate to Fantasy Cares. Fantasy Cares is one of the preeminent charity organizations within the fantasy community. Fantasy football has kind of galvanized itself behind Scott Fish, and it is a beautiful thing to see what we can do with our donations of money and time and effort. And it's the Scott Fish Bowl is kind of the crown jewel, but really the secret of the whole thing and the real prize is the donations to Toys for Tots, the donations to the JDRF Foundation, which is type 1 diabetes, the Trevor Project. There are just a whole bunch of charities that benefit from this community and giving. And if you would like my 2024 rookie film notes, you can go to fantasycares.org/dummies, make a donation, and you get access to all of those notes. And Bob is going to plus them up, because the last 5 or 6 or 7 years that I've been doing this, I haven't had a place to put my film notes. I've talked to several different companies, and they were interested in paying for them and interesting in featuring them, but we couldn't quite come to an agreement on how they would feature them and whether or not I had access to them. And finally, I found a place where I feel good about having my film notes, and it also gives access to all of you, anybody who wants to make a donation, and you get for free the 2024 Dynasty Dummies rookie Hootenanny film notes, plussed up by Bob Gilchrist. They look pretty. They're going to come. You're going to get access to a link with the PDF with all of my write-ups, and it's for a fantastic cause. And even if you don't want my write-ups, donate to fantasycares.org. They have a bunch of contests there. They have T-shirts for sale for the Scott Fish Bowl. This year, the theme is movies, and the T-shirts are amazing. So that's one of my favorite pieces about the community. One of the things that I really will get behind and be vocal about. And to be able to contribute in this way with my film notes, and we've already raised, I think we're up around $400 already raised with my film notes. And if you want to be a part of that, I would be appreciative. And you will be appreciative when you sit there in November and early December and come across your timeline the Toys for Tots donations, and everybody get all excited, and cart after cart after cart of toys that goes to kids who are in situations where they really need the help and they deserve to have Christmases, and to be able to provide that with your help, man, it doesn't get much better than that. All right, I think that is about all I have the pipes for. I apologize for my voice. It's been a rough go of it, and J Mike is having it worse than I am. So he'll be back next week. Hopefully he's feeling better. Hopefully his family's back to the front and center and feeling better. Hopefully I am a little bit less gravelly, less guttural when we get back next week, and we'll have some running backs for you. We'll have that last Dynasty Dummies rookie Hootenanny for the 2024 season, because week after next, that Thursday, is the NFL draft. And I don't know yet exactly what's going to happen, but there's a chance we may be here for at least day 2, maybe day 1. I don't know. I'm going to have to talk to Bob Gilchrist and Russ and maybe Scott Fish and John Bosch and see what's going on with the Fantasy Cares feed, and whether or not I've got some pals to hang out with. But we like to do a day 2 show with the Dynasty Dummies, and we're here. This is the culmination of all of this research, all of this work. We're going to finally get draft capital, the end all be all, not really, but it is the best indicator of success that we get. So it's the final piece, and we'll be able to kind of put together our final rankings, where they go, and then how you have to take them. But I really appreciate you showing up, watching, being in the chat. It means more to me than having people be interested in being here, being interested in listening, being interested in what we have to say. And also, the fun part about it is, for me, a lot of people use this as a launching point to get into their own evaluations. And that's exactly what this is supposed to be. I'm not the end all be all as an evaluator, but I try to make this accessible. And if we can make this accessible and have more people involved, more eyes, I think that's a great thing. So I appreciate you being here. This has been the Dynasty Dummies. You can find J Mike at JMikeCheck on Twitter. I am at Tacit Assassin 13. The show is at Dynasty Dummies. And this has been the Dynasty Dummies. Thank you for listening.